What's going on, guys? This is Rob. If you guys enjoy my content, make sure you hit the subscribe button and make sure you hit that little bell so you never miss out on my sexy voice. Okay, so continuing on with our discussion on the Marvel cosmic landscape, at this point we pick up with two things, really like the death of Thanos and the origin of Drax the Destroyer. Now, it's also kind of cool because we're going to pick up with Moondragon here as well, and this will really be like the first time we've talked about Heather Douglas. We never really had a reason to discuss her before, but the fact remains that the last video that we had on this, we basically had like the controller, who was basically a guy that was essentially creating these little discs that were taking control of people's minds. He wasn't really relevant. We ended up finding out that he was basically just a henchman of Thanos, and that there were certain people Thanos was basically controlling. Keep in mind, this was back in the day when Thanos was still relatively new to the Marvel landscape. So in a lot of ways, Jim Starlin was still fleshing his character out. Now in this day and age right now, because Thanos is so powerful, you would never see him go to someone like the controller and say, make mind control discs for me so I can conquer Earth or I can infiltrate Earth. Instead, he would just show up and just start wrecking people. But a lot of that was because of the stuff that was done here, because of this Jim Starlin, type of storytelling for back in the 1970s. And so what we end up doing here is basically picking up with Thanos in possession of the cosmic cube, which is what we had in the last video. In the last video with his character, we essentially ended with Thanos himself acquiring the cosmic cube after having defeated Drax the Destroyer. Now, the cool thing about this is, remember, the cosmic cube is not new here. It's not the first time it's ever appeared in Marvel Comics. It's been around for a while. But when Jim Starlin was going through, and this is one of the things that writers still do to this day, especially people like Hickman, things like that, when Jim Starlin was writing the story, it was really a matter of kind of going through and looking at what had been done so far. And when we looked at the cosmic cube, by and large, the cosmic cube was used exactly as Thanos describes it, for petty ambitions, for small time things. You never saw Advanced Idea Mechanics or the Red Skull gain a cosmic cube and then say, I'm gonna conquer the universe. Instead, they just saw them as really powerful artifacts. But what they didn't know was the true nature of a cosmic cube. And that's what Thanos hits at here. Thanos basically says, this cosmic cube is a wishing box. Now, a couple things that we're gonna do here, or at least one thing that I wanna do, is I wanna kind of grab some modern day information and throw it in there. At the time that this was done, the cosmic cubes were never fully fleshed out. The cosmic cube wasn't really fleshed out until Fantastic Four like 214 or something along those lines, which was the unofficial Secret Wars 3. When it came to the cosmic cubes, originally they were exactly as you see it, just a box that contained a lot of energy. And you would basically have a portal that would be open and the energy would come from that portal and it would enter into a stasis cube of sorts. And then a person could use that energy for virtually anything they wanted to. Now, this is one of those times when Starlin comes along and says, the energy of a cosmic cube is not infinite. And so in this instance, that's a concept that he's toying with. But with regards to the nature of the cubes themselves, what we learned really within the last maybe 20 years, not even 20 years, I'd say probably in the last 30 years that Marvel Comics has been publishing, what we ended up learning is that a cosmic cube, when a person goes to create one, what they do is they open a pocket dimension to the realm of the Beyonders, or I guess a portal to the realm of the Beyonders, just these beings of astronomical power. I mean, we saw that in Secret Wars when they basically killed all the cosmic entities except the one above all. They killed the Living Tribunal, Infinity, Eternity, they destroyed the multiverse, the whole 9 yards. That energy from a cosmic cube goes directly into the, containment cube, which is, the cosmic cube itself, and then a person can use it. The truth is that they are immensely powerful, meaning you can do anything you want with a cosmic cube. You can even defy the laws of physics. So it's really crazy the kind of things that you can pull off. But again, at this point, we jump into the character of Moondragon. Now, with a Heather Douglas, she is extremely powerful when it comes to telepathy, but that's really the only thing she does have. I mean, she does have a fighting ability, but whenever you see Moondragon, you're only ever really going to see her using telepathy. I mean, you might see her do a few things here and there, but with Heather, it's really just telepathy. That's really all she has. And so what we end up finding out is that Drax the Destroyer, after having been defeated by Thanos, effectively came to and then showed up at Avengers Mansion. But for most of these people, they've never heard of this guy. They don't know who he is. They just know him, or at least they don't know him as Drax the Destroyer. He's just a guy who's there. And so because of the fact that Captain Marvel has met Drax, because of the fact that Captain Marvel knows who he is, what he ends up doing is stopping the entire conflict. But the fact remains here that what we end up finding out, at least is one of the reasons why this is so significant, is because this begins to hit at the relationship between Thanos and Mistress Death. So for those of you guys who are familiar with Thanos, but you've been curious how it is that Thanos and Mistress Death first got together, this is really it. Now, in terms of Marvel's publication chronology, this is the first time we ever see the two of them together. In terms of the in-universe continuity, the in-universe chronology, this is not the first time we've seen them together. If you go back and you read the book Thanos Rising by Ed Brubaker, I want to say it is, it hits back at the origin of Thanos, and what it says is that when he was a little kid, he was met by Mistress Death for the very first time. Now, we're not given an explicit reason as to why, at least I'm not particularly told as to why. And even Ed Brubaker kind of hits on the idea, says, well, maybe it's because he's basically a mutant among his own people. Maybe it's because, you know, there was a kind of darkness hidden within him. But for whatever reason, Mistress Death had an interest in Thanos. And the result is that she cultivated this darker side of his character so that as he began to rise into his adolescent years, going into his teenage years, his 20s, his 30s, so on and so forth, he became obsessed with death. And as a result, he eventually rose to become the person that we know now. Now, with Thanos rising, there were a lot of things going on behind the scenes in terms of his character, the various escapades that he was in. But the long and short of it was that over the course of that story, he developed a love for Mistress Death. And that's why this is the case. He's effectively in love with her. And that's all he ever really desires to do, is to impress her. Now, again, this is the first time we really see a demonstration of the fact that Thanos is in love with Mistress Death, that he absolutely loves her in terms of the publication history. So this is a very significant moment in the realm of Marvel Comics with regards to the character of Thanos and so on. But because of the fact that Thanos is wielding the Cosmic Cube, what he does is he kind of sits down and he says, okay, so there are a handful of people that are more important than others. You know, for example, Mar-Vell, Mentor, the father of Thanos, Eros, the brother of Thanos. Basically, anyone who's ever fought Thanos or is aware of him or what he's capable of is immediately removed. Now, it's not done in the same vein as like the Infinity Gauntlet, right? It's not like he walks out and then just snaps his fingers and blinks out half the life in the universe. Instead, what he does is he puts them in a kind of bioelectric field and simply forces them to watch. Now, this is important because those of you guys who are familiar with the Infinity Gauntlet story, that'll be history repeating itself. It won't be the first time that one, Thanos has gathered the Infinity Stones, he's done that before, but two, it's not the first time he allowed his arrogance to run away with him. That was the whole basis of the Infinity Gauntlet story. Thanos became just exceedingly arrogant, and as a result, it essentially cost him everything. Again, we've got all that stuff covered, but the fact remains, Thanos basically forces these guys to watch when he sends in his raiding party, his raiding fleet or whatever it is, and they just attack Earth. Again, this is early stuff, and that's something to keep in mind. Because of the fact that Jim Starlin was basically writing stories that were reminiscent of superhero escapades and supervillain escapades at the time, Thanos, despite being as powerful as he is, at the end of the day, was basically written like your run-of-the-mill villain. That he's got his own henchmen, he's implementing his own schemes, that's really about it. It wouldn't be until after this, when Thanos began to really rise in popularity among readers, that Jim Starlin would start going in the direction of making Thanos like a one-man band. That basically it would just be him and his schemes. Mistress Death might be around there somewhere, but basically Thanos can take on anything in the universe given enough time and probably win. So that's where all that stuff really begins to come in. But this really begins to hit home because Thanos having the Cosmic Cube really like taunts people. You know, for example, like Mentor and various people speak up. Do you really believe you stand a chance? You know, we're just normal people, but what chance do you stand against gods? And that's when he brings in Kronos, who's basically the god of the Titans, the race of Thanos himself, and essentially says, I've captured a cosmic entity. This cosmic entity is now under my control. But notice, this is limited. This is limited in a lot of ways. Now, the reason why we don't really see things like Eternity, the reason why we don't really see things like Galactus here is because this was experimentation. This was testing the waters. When it came to a story like Infinity Gauntlet, a lot of people look at that and say, that's when Thanos peaked. That was the most powerful he'd ever been. And so if we were to grab the, series of stories where they actually took place in the Marvel Universe and had consequences in the future of the Marvel Universe, something that's referenced continually, then Infinity Gauntlet's probably the most significant moment in Thanos' history. And so the result is that it was really kind of building up to that. Now, if this had happened here, let's say, for example, Thanos had the Cosmic Cube and he defeated all the cosmic entities and we basically got everything that happened in Infinity Gauntlet in this story, Thanos would have peaked in the mid-1970s and he would have dropped off after that. And so it was just a matter of experimentation. It was a matter of testing the waters. How will people respond to a being of universal intelligence and almost incalculable power, amplifying all that by acquiring a cosmic cube and then intending to just obliterate the universe? How does all that work? Now, the other half of this was to build on the arrogance of Thanos. For Jim Starlin, when he originally introduced him, it was the idea that Thanos didn't even think the Earth superheroes were worthy of his attention. Hence the reason why he didn't show up himself. It was a robot that he had sent in his place. Now, that was kind of toying with the idea of, are people even interested in his character in the first place? But that was the nature of it. For example, for those of you guys who have seen the trailer for Infinity War, the reason why Thanos shows up without all of his suit on is a display of power. It's essentially him showing up and saying, look, I don't even have to get decked. Like, I don't have to put on the armor or anything like that. Like, you're Earthlings. How powerful could you really be? And then just shows up and takes the Infinity Stones and leaves. It's walking into a corner store, grabbing a Diet Coke, paying and walking. There's no real concern there. There's no real worry there. It's just going in, doing what you need to do, and then leaving. And that's it. What hope do Earth superheroes have? That's the kind of power that's being put on display when it came to the Infinity War trailer. But that's what happens here. I mean, with the power of the Cosmic Cube here, it is kind of traditional storytelling. It's old school storytelling. And the reason why I say that is is because in order to be able to craft a story that would work in a way to where the Earth superheroes would still have a chance, what we end up having is basically Captain Mar-Vell invoking the bracelets that he wears. Now, for those of you guys who don't know, again, the idea of Captain Mar-Vell is that the Negabands, I think they were, he basically hits them together and switches places with Rick Jones, the person that Bruce Banner rescued and was hit with a gamma bomb. But the idea was that here back in the day, essentially Captain Mar-Vell would hit his bands together and then it would allow him to switch places with Rick Jones. And Captain Mar-Vell would go into the negative zone and Rick Jones would be the one who would walk around. And if they hit them again, the roles would reverse. What ends up happening here is Mar-Vell hits his bands together and it quote unquote short circuits the bioelectric field. It's kind of cheap. It's kind of, like, all right, this is obviously an out, but this is how comics were done back then. It's one of those things where comics have just kind of evolved over the years. And so that's why we get that little bit of a cheap escape here. But at this point, it's Thanos who's basically in the midst of an attack with the various Avengers. He loses the cosmic cube for a moment, and then that's really about it. At that point, it turns into Captain Mar-Vell just kind of facing off against him. He gets trashed, and then Moondragon uses her telepathy. Now, for the most part, while her character has progressed over the years, even back then, back at the time this story was written, Moondragon was established as being one of the most powerful beings in existence in the Marvel Universe. Now, as far as I'm aware, Moondragon's been dead since like Annihilation Conquest. Like, she's been gone for a while. And in fact, she was turned into a literal dragon at one point in time, which is kind of weird. But her telepathy has always been up there. She's also made like passes at a lot of different characters, which is kind of weird. That's kind of interesting, but it is cool. But again, this is designed to hit home with the idea that Thanos is incredibly powerful, that it's not just like energy projection, it's not just raw physical strength, it's also the power of the mind. And that's one of the things that Starlin is going to consistently hit on. That's why all these things are really kind of like the foundation of Thanos' growth as a character, because what this initial line of stories is supposed to do, basically this Cosmic Cube saga, what this is designed to do is basically say, okay, so there is a villain named Thanos and he worships death, and Thanos is incredibly strong, and Thanos is incredibly powerful when it comes to energy, and Thanos' mind is almost unrivaled except by some of the most intelligent or some of the most mentally powerful beings out there. But when it comes to that higher echelon, like Galactus or like Reed Richards or somebody like that, very few people can stand toe to toe with the intellect and the experience of Thanos. But again, all these guys are defeated pretty fast by Thanos, who again reacquires the Cosmic Cube and sort of calls it a day and just kind of takes the cube and then ends up facing off against Drax the Destroyer for a second and then discards the Cosmic Cube. And that's it. He really kind of throws it away under this idea that the Cosmic Cube's energy has been drained. And so it is kind of interesting because what Thanos does is, in draining the quote unquote Cosmic Cube energy, he basically elevates himself to godhood. Now again, the Cosmic Cube is a wishing box, but as far as I'm aware, and I could be wrong about this, as far as I'm aware, the energy use of the Cosmic Cube is not contextual on what a person does. What I mean by that is I'm not aware of there being a precedent to basically say, if you wish for a spoon, you only use 1% of the Cosmic Cube's energy. And if you wish for reality warping powers, you use 75% of the Cosmic Cube's energy. I'm not aware of that being the case. It may be that it's one of those things where it just kind of worked out that way. But again, I haven't tracked every single use and every single storyline, every single instance of the Cosmic Cube. I probably should, since that's kind of what my channel is designed to do. But the fact remains, it is kind of interesting because Drax the Destroyer, this really hits at the nature of Drax. He is designed singularly for the purpose of defeating Thanos. That's it. And this is when we hit back at the nature, or really the origin of Drax the Destroyer. And it's actually pretty cool. Initially, this all kind of kicks off with Thanos using the Cosmic Cube to basically just kind of create these demonic looking beings out of just like machinery and the whole of, the vessel they're on. And that's really about it. And Captain Marvel faces off against them, and Iron Man faces off against them. And, some of these things are kind of destroyed and that's really about it. But when Drax goes to face off directly against Thanos in his almost godlike state, Thanos in turn reveals the origin of Drax the Destroyer. And this is cool because this also reveals the origin of Heather Douglas, the daughter of Drax. And so what we end up finding out here is that in like the mid-1950s, Thanos was basically scouting Earth because at this point he was hunting for the Cosmic Cube. He was trying to find where it was that it was located, and Earth made sense, of all the different beings that were rising to prominence, the kind of power the different beings on Earth possessed. Even back then in the 50s, while it wasn't nearly where it was in like the 60s and 70s, even back then, there were still a lot of powerful beings on Earth. And so where Thanos had scouted Earth but intended to remain undetected, he had ultimately had a kind of calculation error, and then he was seen by Arthur Douglas, and as a result, he basically obliterated their car. In the process, Yvette Douglas, the wife of Drax the Destroyer, died, and then Heather was thought to have been dead, and Arthur himself died. And the result was that Heather had actually survived the crash, and when she did, she was effectively taken by Mentor, the father of Thanos, and then brought to Titan itself. And there she was trained on how to use her powers of telepathy, as well as becoming, exceedingly good at hand-to-hand combat. And so the result was that as time progressed, she began to rise to prominence and then became the character of Moondragon. For Arthur Douglas himself, when the decision was made by Kronos, the god of the Titans, to create a being that could single-handedly defeat Thanos, it made sense to create a being that basically would have a vendetta against Thanos. And the reason why was because if Drax the Destroyer was made singularly for the purpose of defeating Thanos, what we also know is he was given autonomy. He was given the ability to operate according to his own wishes and wants, his own desires. He wasn't designed with a preset of programming that he would always try to complete. And so the result is that Kronos seemed to know that at some point along the line, Drax the Destroyer may decide not to attack Thanos anymore. Maybe he fights him 5 times and realizes it's a mute point and just says, whatever, I'm just gonna go explore the universe, who knows? But there needed to be something else that kicked in, a kind of secondary motivation. And so when Drax the Destroyer's memories were most likely restored, whether it was by his own volition or because somebody else returned them, it would give him a continued motivation to track down Thanos, because in essence, Thanos killed the family of Drax the Destroyer. And that's exactly what happens here. Now, for those of you guys from the Marvel Cinematic Universe, that's kind of what's going on to a degree. The MCU has modified it a bit in the sense that they said that Ronan the Accuser was the one that, destroyed the family of Drax. I wouldn't be surprised if Marvel came back and they said, well, Ronan the Accuser did it, but he did it because Thanos told him to. That'll most likely be what happens. And then I could see them bringing in the character of Moondragon and bringing in the origin, the full-on origin of Drax the Destroyer, because remember, we haven't really seen the full origin of Drax in the MCU. We don't really know everything that goes on with his character. But the fact remains here that in the midst of all this, Mar-Vell's basically met with the arrival of Isaac. Now remember, Isaac is the computer system that was designed by Mentor on the moon Titan to basically govern the goings-on of the Titan people. It is cool because Isaac is able to basically look at everything that's going on and kind of analyze things in a way that a person normally wouldn't be able to, just because of the fact that they're tied up with everything that's going on, and then effectively answer questions for people. And so what ends up happening is Mar-Vell asks the question, how can I defeat these demons? And Isaac's response is, you can't. The only way for you to defeat them is to leave this plane of existence. Otherwise, they will track you forever. They will find you forever. Either that, or you have to somehow destroy Thanos, which is probably something that you can't really pull off. And so the result is that Captain Marvel has the idea, well, then I'll just turn into Rick Jones. Like, I'll literally hit my bands together, Rick Jones will pop out, Captain Marvel will be gone. And if these machines are chasing after the essence of Captain Marvel, then they won't do anything. And that's exactly what happens. Because of the fact that Mar-Vell and Rick Jones switch places, ultimately we end up having these robots just kind of stop. And that's really about it. Now, with Rick Jones grabbing the Cosmic Cube, teleports himself away, goes to a quote-unquote safe place. But it is cool because what he does is he taunts Thanos. And this is when the arrogance and the ego of Thanos begin to come into play. Because Rick Jones basically taunts him and says, hey, look, if you were really as powerful as you say you are, then you would deal with us yourself. You wouldn't send in thralls. It's basically a young kid talking trash. If this was Xbox, Thanos would track this kid down. That's really what this is. It's kind of funny, and it's actually pretty intelligent to kind of prey on that ego of sorts, to essentially build on that idea. But the whole point of this was to essentially allow Mar-Vell to get away from these demons and then bring Thanos to him so that he could focus on Thanos explicitly in kind of a one-on-one battle. And that's exactly what happens. What we end up having is Mar-Vell just kind of hits his band, or I guess Rick Jones hits his bands together, him and Mar-Vell switch places again, and Captain Mar-Vell's back in the field. Now, the other thing to bear in mind here is, again, this is still Thanos, exceedingly powerful. He's still using all this energy. So while Mar-Vell is able to fight to a degree and able to hold his own to a degree, at the end of the day, he's not godly powerful, and he's not really able to defeat Thanos in the traditional sense. It ultimately doesn't work that way. He just doesn't have the capability to pull it off. And so the result is that, of course, Drax and Mar-Vell kind of team up to a degree, but Mar-Vell comes to a realization. What he says is that the energy that Thanos is using has to be coming from somewhere. Because of the way the cosmic cubes work, when a person uses the cosmic cube to achieve a goal, that energy is continually drawn from the cosmic cube in order to make sure that goal stays intact. And so when Mar-Vell kind of looks around at the landscape, what he realizes is Thanos pulled an incredibly intelligent ruse, that when they were all back on the ship, that Thanos had said, well, I've drained the energy of the cosmic cube, and then just threw it away. And no one had any reason to question it. No one had any reason to wonder, is Thanos lying or not? Is the cube still full of energy? But Mar-Vell puts two and two together and actually realizes Thanos is still drawing on the cosmic cube's energy. It's the only way for him to maintain his current form. The cosmic cube has to be located somewhere, and then ultimately is able to track it down. Mar-Vell manages to find the cosmic cube and then effectively destroy its physical form. And when he does, Thanos goes with it. Thanos' essence is just kind of dispersed among the spaceways, and Thanos essentially dies. He doesn't really have a form anymore. And so what this did is it allowed for Jim Starlin to kind of take the character of Thanos and sort of sit him on the back burner for a little bit. And then at that point, switch over to focusing more on Adam Warlock and some of the things that came after that with regards to sort of evolving his character as a cosmic figure. But the fact remains that at this point in time, this is where where Thanos dies. This is basically his first death. He's essentially gone. And it's kind of ironic because they talk about that, the idea that Thanos worshiped death and Thanos now gets to finally be with death. So it is interesting. It is kind of a cool little thing. But again, it's one of these things where the story just kind of wraps up super fast. It's not designed to linger. It's not designed to drag on. You get like a one-page epilogue where everybody's just kind of like, man, that was crazy. Man, I can't believe that happened. But you know, I mean, all in a day of the Avengers, and they all go back to the Avengers HQ and that's it. The story of Captain Marvel picks up with another story, and that's really about it. But if you guys are new here to Comics Explained, make sure you guys hit the sub button to become part of the Rob Corps. If you guys enjoyed this video, make sure you drop a like. And yeah, in the next video, we pick up with the return of Thanos and the events that led into Infinity Gauntlet. But with that being said, guys, we're going to bring this video to an end, and I will catch you all later. Peace.